Hey everyone, and welcome back to Daily Tuition. In this video, we are going to create this stunning ChatGPT 2.0 app with Next.js. We are going to use OpenAI API model to make this application. Let me show you what we are going to build in this app. You can click on this new chat button to create a new chat. When you click on it, you can see you don't have any chats inside this first row. If you want, you can create multiple chats by clicking on this new chat button. Now, let me just select the second chat and then add a message here and then search for the population of India. When I press enter, we're going to have a response back from the OpenAI API. And if you want to search for the CEO of Google, you can search for that as well. You can just specify your question and press enter. You will have the answer back from the API. If you click on this room 1, right now we don't have any chat here. If you add a question inside this text box and press enter, then you're going to store all your questions inside this first row. In the chat 3, we don't have anything, right? So if you want to delete this, you can click on this delete button, and this is going to delete your third row. So we are going to build this really from the scratch. So before taking your too much time, let's get started. So I'm going to open the Visual Studio Code and create an empty directory inside it. I'm going to name that directory OpenAI. You can name this project anything, that's upon you. I'm going to name it OpenAI. Just after that, open the terminal, enter into the project directory, and execute here a command called npx create next app, and then specify your directory name. Now, because we are in the current directory, we pass here dot and press enter. You'll be asked, would you like to use TypeScript with this project? Just for now, just say no and press enter. So this will quickly create the Next.js project inside your OpenAI directory. Now, once your Next.js project is successfully created, let me just clear the screen and open the browser to install Tailwind CSS. So I'm going to search for Tailwind CSS, and right from here, I'm going to click on Get Started, choose the framework guide, and click on Next.js. Because we are working on Next.js project, I'm going to choose Next.js. Now we already have the project, so we don't need this command. We need to install Tailwind CSS, Post CSS, and this auto prefixer. So let me just copy this command and then specify that right inside this terminal. When I press enter, this is going to install all these 3 packages inside my Next.js application. Just after that, you need to create the Tailwind CSS configuration file with this command. So copy this and specify this command right here. So this command is going to create Tailwind CSS configuration file inside your project. Just after that, you have to import this statement inside your tailwind config.js file. So just copy it back to your tailwind config.js, and here you have to add this code right inside this content, something like this. Now, if you're using source directory, then leave this statement as it is. Now, because we are not using source directory, I'm going to get rid of this statement. Just like this. Save the file and open the global.css file and put these 3 commands inside it and back to the global.css. So right inside the styles, we have global.css. Get rid of all this code, put these 3 commands, save this file, and then say npm run dev. So this command is going to start the development server. So I'm going to say here npm run dev. So this is going to start the development server on the localhost 3000. So when I click on this link, this will open the localhost 3000, and we have the Next.js app running on this port. Just after that, let's close this global file, back to the pages, and here you have the default code of this application. Just get rid of it. So I'm going to get rid of all this code right from here and add a simple division tag, and inside that I'm going to add h1 heading tag, and to this h1 I'm simply going to specify this Tailwind classes with this hello world text. So let me just get rid of this h1, and here I'm going to put this Tailwind classes. Let me save the changes, back to the project, and you can see once you have the Tailwind styling, let me close these files. Just for that, you have to search for Google font, open the Google font website, and right from here you have to search for Poppins font family, this one. Select the regular style, so scroll down, and here you have the regular 400. Select the regular styling, click on this import, and copy this import statement. Back to your application, open the global.css, and at the top you have to add that import statement, just like this. Just or that, scroll down, and here you have to say asterisk, select all the descendant element, and then specify font family, which is Poppins. And the fallback value is sans serif. Let me save the changes back to the project. And here you can notice you have this Poppins font family to your text. Let me just close this. Now, just out of that, let's create a UI for the ChatGPT chatbot. Now, once we have a simple Next.js application, let me first open my finished project. And here you can notice we have the new chat rooms. And at the center, we're going to have all the chats of this room. What we're going to do is, I'm going to first create the UI of this application and then add all the functionality of the ChatGPT to this app. And let me just toggle this window on the right side. And now what I want to create a component directory to create all the components of this project. So inside this OpenAI project here, I'm going to create a new component directory and name this directory components. And inside these components, we're going to have all the components of this project. So I'm going to back to the index of this file. So I'm going to open the pages, index.js, and here I'm going to add all that components. So let me first create the layout of this project. So inside this div right here, to this div, we specify some Tailwind classes. So I'm going to first add here grid to create grid layout, and then I'm going to specify grid calls 6. I'm going to create 6-column grid inside this application. Just out of that, inside this, here we have 2 grid items. This is the first grid item, and this is the second grid item. If I save the changes, here you can notice we have these 2 grid items. If I specify here class name bg gray 300, then this is going to specify a background color to this first division tag. Let me specify background color to the second div as well. So you can see we have the first and the second div. Now what I want to span these columns. So to this first div right here, I'm going to specify call span 1. And then to this first div, I'm going to specify bg gray 900 background color. We're also going to add aside, a custom class, and z-index 10. Save the changes, and now we have the first column right here. And then I'm going to specify some color. So I'm going to add text gray 50. And now we have this first aside column here, just like this. So we have this chat room column on the left side of this application. Just out of that, at the center, we have all the chats. So to the center here, I'm going to first specify the background color 800, then text gray 50, and then I'm going to specify this class, which is call span 5. So I'm going to increase the width of this div to the column 5. Save the changes. So we have the 5 column width to this division tag. Just out of that, here we specify minimum height, which is screen. So this will just add height to this section. This is the minimum height of the screen. And then I'm going to add height full and margin bottom 40. So this will add 10 rem bottom margin to this section. Just out of that, right here inside this first division tag, right here, I'm going to have the aside section. And inside this div, right here, I'm going to have the main and the search bar. So we have the main section and the search bar inside the second column, and aside section in the first column. So as you can see, in the first column, we have all the rooms, and inside the main column, we have the actual chat. So inside this main, let's create a new component here with the name aside.js. That's upon you, you can specify any name to this component. Inside this aside.js, here we export a default function, something like this. And from this function, we're going to return a simple aside tag with h1 heading tag. Let's suppose we specify here aside component. Save this file back to the index.js, and right up here, let me get rid of this import statement because we are not using it. And here I'm going to say import aside from components aside. And then I'm going to use this aside right here, something like this. So now we have this aside component inside the index.js. So when I save the changes, here I'm going to have the aside component. Let me back to the aside component right here and add some Tailwind classes to it. So to this aside right here, I'm going to specify class names So we first specify fixed, then specify left 0, width is going to be 80, and height is going to be screen. After that, I will add the BG gray color, which is 900. And just after that, I'm going to get rid of this h1 heading tag. And here I'm going to add a div and then add some Tailwind classes to it. So I'm going to first specify text gray 50 to specify gray 50 color to all the text. Then add flex column. So this will create a flex box inside this div. Just after that, inside this div right here, let me add the new chat button. This one, this new chat button. So to create this new chat button right here, I'm going to add a button with the text new chat. And to this button, we specify some class names. So I'm going to first specify here border, then specify rounded MD, and then I'm going to add some border color. So border gray 600. Then I'm going to add width, which is 4 by 5. So this will add 80% width to this button. And then we're going to add hover effect to this button. So to add hover effect, here I'm going to add hover BG indigo 600. So this will add hover effect to this button. You can notice. Now just after that, let me center this button to this div right here. I'm going to add item center to center this button and then add some padding Y3. So this will add top and bottom padding to this section. Just after that, we also need to add some gap between all the items. So I'm going to add gap 5. So this will add gap between all the flex items. Just after that, once we have it, to this button, instead of just this new chat, inside this finish application, you can see we have this icon here and have some padding to this button. So to add this icon, I'm using React icon library here. So I'm going to open the terminal. Let me stop the development server. And here I'm going to say npm install. And I'm going to install a library called React icons. And I'm going to press enter and install this library. Let me start the development server again. Close the terminal. And at the top, I'm going to add the React icon. So if you back to the browser and here, if you search for React icons, you can search for different icons and use it in your Next.js application. I'm using box icon, so I'm going to choose this import statement. Let me just copy it and specify that right here. So let's suppose that if I choose this icon, you just have to click on it. This will copy the icon name, and then you have to import that name right up here. And now you can use this name inside your application. So now if you paste this name and add this component, when you save the changes, you can see you have this icon right inside your button. Now, instead of this icon, I'm using the plus icon. So I'm going to copy the plus icon name and specify that right here. If you want, you can self-close this component, something like this. So now I have this plus icon here. Just for that, I need to add some padding to this button. So let me grab this icon and put that inside a span tag, something like this. And to the span tag, let me add class name block and padding y3. And just for that, to this icon, let me specify some class names. So class name is going to be inline, and then I'm going to specify size 20. This will increase the size of this icon. You can notice. Just after that, just after this span tag right here, I'm going to add some space, and here I'm going to add new chat. That's it. So now the chat button is now successfully ready. Just after that, once we have the chat button, right down here, just after this button, right down here, we have here a division tag, and here we can have the chat list. So we first specify the Tailwind classes here. So I'm going to add with full, then add flex, then add flex column, and then I'm going to add gap 4 and padding x 3. And inside this division tag, we're going to have these rooms. So let me just create these room buttons inside this application. So I'm going to scroll down, and here, let me add a division tag, and to this div, we specify class name, width is going to be full. Then I'm going to add border 0, then add rounded MD, BG gray, which is 800, then add padding Y1, padding X3, and flex, justify center, and item center. That's it. And inside this div, right here, I'm going to add my button. So I'm simply going to add here a button with some classes. So I'm simply going to add here text left. Then I'm going to add a class called truncate. This will hide all the overflow text from this button. Then add width full, and I'm also going to add active bg violet 700. So when you click on the button, I'm going to have this background color to this button. Just so that inside this button right here, I have a span tag, and to this span tag we have some classes. So inside this span tag we simply have a text called room1, and to this span tag we specify some classes. So here we specify block padding y3 and text gray 50. Now when I save the changes, you're going to have the result something like this. And if you're back to the finished website, here you have this icon here. Right up here, I'm going to add the comment icon. So we need to first import that at the top. So let me just import that icon right up here and put that icon right inside this span tag, something like. And to this comment, let me specify class names inline mx2, and the size is going to be 20. Save the changes, and you can see we have this icon and the room name. Now just out of this button, right down here we have another button for delete. So if you open your finished website, then you will notice here you have this delete button. So let me just say here button, then specify some classes here. So let me add bg gradient to left, and then I'm going to add from gray 800. Just out of that, I'm going to add padding y4, padding x3, and add some hover effect. So I'm going to add hover text indigo 400. And just out of that, inside this button, I want to add the delete icon. So let me add a trash icon here. Copy this and specify that right here. Something like this. See the changes? So you can see we have this trash icon with this hover effect. So when you hover on it, you will have this hover color to this delete button. Now if you copy this division tag, this one, and paste it just down here, save the changes, then this is going to create a second room for your application. Now instead of doing this, I'm using the map function to iterate over these rooms when we have the backend data. Just for now, I'm going to leave everything as it is. And now let's move to the main section of this ChatGPT UI. Now, once you have the aside section of this ChatGPT 2.0, let's create the main section of this app. Let me close this aside and this global.css file. And right inside this index.js, when you scroll down, here you have the main and the search bar. Instead of creating the main section and the search bar inside this index.js, let's create a component for that. So inside this components folder, then I'm going to create a new component with the name main.js. And then inside this index.js, let me first import that component at the top. Let me add here a command and say import all components. And right here, I'm going to add my main section. So say import main from, and in the single quote, then specify double dot / specify components, and here you have your main file. So I'm going to import the main component, just copy it, and then specify that right here, just like this. So now when you save the changes, right now you don't have anything inside this main. So let me first say export default function, and here you're going to return main component. So you call main and add h1 here and say main component. That's it. So here you have the main component of this app. Now inside this main, we're going to have two important components. First is the ask component, where we're going to display the user question, and then we have the server response. So let me create both these components inside my components directory. Right here, I'm going to create a new component with the name ask.js and create another file with the name response.js. I'm going to back to the ask.js, and right here, let me export a default function. And from this function, I'm going to simply return a division tag with the Tailwind classes. So I'm going to add here grade. Grade calls 12. So I'm going to create here 12 column layout. And then I'm going to specify here BG grade 700. And then I'm going to specify here rounded full. Inside this div right here, I'm going to add two items. So let me add here a div. So this is the item 1. And again, this is the item 2. Save this and back to the main. And right up here, you need to first import this ask component. So you have to say here ask. From the ask file, you have this component in the current directory, so you don't have to move anywhere else. Just like this, and copy this, and right down here, I'm going to paste this component inside this main section. Save this changes, and here you have two grid items. Just are that inside this ask, right here inside this first div, we're going to have user profile image. So instead of this item 1, I'm going to add the Next.js image component. So we need to first say here import image from next image, and then add that image right here. To this image, let me add a source attribute. So I'm going to add here a source, and inside this source, I'm going to add image profile. Right now, we don't have any image inside this project. So let me add the asset folder inside this public directory and add the profile images of this project. Don't worry, you can download all these images from the finished project. So I'm going to add the asset folder inside this public directory and import my profile images. So now once I place my asset folder inside this public directory, here I'm going to have two images, the ChatGPT logo and the man.png file. Let's use this profile image inside this project. I'm simply going to say here / specify assets and then specify the man.png file. When you save it, you're going to have an error message because with the image component, you need to specify width. Width is going to be 50, and you also need to specify height. Height is also going to be 50. Save the changes, and here you can see we have this profile here. Just for that, we also need to specify the alt attribute. The alt is going to be profile, just like this. Save the changes, and here you can see we have the result something like this. Just out of that, to this div, let me add some classes. So add class name. First is the custom class, which is icon. Then add call span 1, bg indigo 500. Then I'm going to add margin right auto and rounded full with padding 2. Save this. So we have this icon with this background color. Just for that, to the second div right here, I'm going to add some classes. So let me add here class name question, and just for that, I'm going to specify here call span 11. So I'm going to specify 11 column space to this division tag. Then let me add a padding x4 to add left and right padding, add flex column. Then I'm going to add justify center. Inside this div right here, instead of just this text, I'm going to add a span tag with the class name text.lg. So this will add font size to this span tag. And right inside this span tag, just for now, I'm going to add hard-coded text. What is ChatGPT? Save the changes, and we are going to have the result what I want. Just for that, let me add the response component as well. So back to the response, and here I'm going to copy and paste the same ask component right inside this response. And then I'm going to get rid of few things from here. Get rid of this background color and this rounded full. And here I'm going to add padding by 4. Just for that, I'm going to leave these icon classes as it is, and just going to change this background color, this one. And instead of this indigo color, right now I'm going to use hex color here inside this square bracket. So I'm going to copy and paste the hex color inside this bracket, something like this. So this will add this color to this icon. Just for that, right here I'm using the ChatGPT logo. So get rid of this man.png and paste the ChatGPT logo.png file. Just sort that here instead of question, we have your answer. So let me just add here answer and get rid of all these classes. And instead of this span tag, now we're going to add a paragraph. And to this paragraph, I'm going to add a text LG and padding by 4. Just sort that. Inside this paragraph, I'm going to simply call ChatGPT is a chatbot. Let me say the changes. Back to the main. And here at the top, let me first add import response from, in the single quote, I'm going to add the response.js file. Let me copy this component and specify that right here. Save this file and here is the response. Just start that. Let me add some classes to this main section. I'm going to specify class names. So I'm going to first add the container and MX auto to center everything and then add width 3 by 5. So this will add a 60% width to this section. Then add padding by 5 to add top and bottom padding. Save the changes. And here I'm going to have the result what I want. Now once we have the main chat section of this application, let's create this search bar. So if you back to the finish website, you can see just down here, we have this search bar. Let me just create this search bar at the bottom of this application. I hope you understand how to create this aside and this main section of this application. Let's create this search bar for this ChatGPT 2.0. So I'm going to back to my application and here I'm going to create a new component right inside my components folder. I'm going to name this component search.js. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this component. That's completely upon you. And right here inside this component, here I'm going to say export default function. And I'm going to simply return a division tag right from this function with h1 search input text box. Save this. Back to the index.js. At the top, don't forget to import that component. So specify here import search from, in the double dot / we have components and inside that we have search.js file. Let me copy this component and then specify that right here. Save the changes and here we go. We have this search component here. Just out of that, just back to the search.js. Let's add the input text box so the user can ask a question to the ChatGPT and get a response back. So to this div, let me add class name. So I'm going to add fix bottom 0 because I want the search bar at the bottom of this application. Then add left 0, width is going to be full, z index 0 and height 40. Just out of that, we need to add text gray 50. Just out of that, I'm going to add here bg gradient to top from gray 800. Just out of that, inside this div right here, I'm going to add another div with Tailwind classes. So here I'm going to create a grid layout. So add a grid calls 6. So I'm going to create 6 column grid layout here. Then specify here absolute. Bottom is going to be 10 and width is going to be full. Inside this div, I'm going to create here a grid item. So I'm going to say here class name call start from the second column. So I'm going to add here a 2. So we need to start this div from the second column and add a space to it. So add call span 6. So this will just take 6 column space to this div. Then I'm going to add flex, justify center, then add item center, and width is going to be full. Just out of this div right here, we have another div. So here we add width 2 by 3. So this will add a 66% width to this div. Then add padding x5, bg gray 800. Then I'm going to add border and add some border color to it. So I'm going to add border gray 800. This is going to be the border color for this div. And then I'm going to add here rounded LG, flex, and item center. That's it. Inside this div, right here, we have the form. We don't need this action attribute, so let's get rid of it. And to this form, let me add some Tailwind classes. So I'm going to add a class name, flex, with full, shadow to Excel, and inside this form right here, I'm going to add the input text box. Let's add an input of the type text. Let me save the changes, and you can see we have this text here, and the background color of this text is white. So let me just add BG transparent to this input text box. So let me add some Tailwind classes here. I'm going to add here class names. Width is going to be full, padding by 3, and BG transparent. Then I'm going to add focus, outline, none. I'm not going to add any outline when we focus on the text box. And at the end, we add text LG. That's it. Just like that, we have to add autofocus to this input text box. So we have here autofocus is going to be autofocus. Just like that, we need to add a placeholder as well. So placeholder is going to be what are you looking for? This is the placeholder. Save the changes. Here is the placeholder, you can see. And just out of this input text box, right down here, we're going to have a button. So we can submit the question. Here we add type, which is going to be submit. And inside this, let me add an icon. So at the top, right up here, I'm going to add the input statement with the icon box icon navigation. We put that icon right inside this button, just like this, and add some Tailwind classes to it. So right here, to this icon, we specify class names, text to Excel. This will add font size, and we add hover effect to it. So we add hover, and in the text, we add some custom hex color. So I'm going to copy and paste hex color to this icon. Save the changes, back to the application, and here you can see when I hover on it, I'm going to have this hover effect to this button. And we have the default cursor inside this input text box. You can notice. Just like that, let me get rid of this h1 heading tag right from here. Now we successfully created the ChatGPT 2.0 UI. Let's create a backend for this application and get the data from the server. Now once you understand how to create this beautiful UI for the ChatGPT 2.0, let's take a look at how we can create the backend for this app. Instead of having these hard-coded values inside this application, we're going to connect the backend and install the OpenAI inside this application so we can ask a question to the ChatGPT and get the response back. So I'm going to open my application, and now instead of working with this front end, let me now work with the backend. So instead of creating a new server, if you're using Next.js, you don't have to create a new server because you already have a built-in server inside Next.js. So if you open this API folder, here you have your backend server. So if you make a request to this hello.js, you will get this response back from the server. Let me show you. I'm going to first open the extension tab, and from here, I'm going to install the Thunder client. I'm going to install this Thunder client extension. I already have this in the VS Code. So let me open that Thunder client extension. So now right from here, you can make different requests. So let me just make a GET request first to the localhost 3000, and then I'm going to specify the API, this folder, and inside that we have this hello.js. So you have to make a request to hello. In Next.js, the file name became endpoint. So the endpoint of this API is now hello. If I make a GET request to this API hello, if I click on send button, you can see I'm going to get this response back from the server. So when you have a backend server inside your Next.js application, you can easily connect the MongoDB database to this backend and store all your data. So let's first understand how to connect MongoDB to this application. I'm going to open the OpenAI project, and here we are going to create a new folder. The folder name is database, and inside that we have a file called connection with the file name con.js. So to create a connection, we need to install Mongoose inside this application. So I'm going to open the terminal. Let me stop the development server. And here I'm going to say npm install Mongoose. I'm going to install Mongoose library inside a project. Once we have it, I'm going to say npm run dev to start the development server again. Once you have your Mongoose, you can easily connect MongoDB database. You can say here import Mongoose from Mongoose. And then you have to say async function connect, and then export this function. So you have to just say here export default. Inside this function, you need to connect the MongoDB Atlas. So you have to open the Google and search for MongoDB. Click on mongodb.com and open this website in the browser. Once you have it, you click on this start free and then click on sign up with Google. Now, once you successfully log in, you will have the window something like this. Right from here, you can view all your projects or create a new project as well. So let's create a new project. Click on this new project icon and then I'm going to specify a name to this project, ChatGPT. Click on next and click on create project. That's it. This is going to create a new project. You can see at the top we have this ChatGPT project name, and just after that you have to click on this build a database button. When you click on it, this is going to deploy your database in the cloud server. So just for now, select this free version and scroll down. Click on create and then specify your username and password. Right now, I'm going to specify a simple username and password, admin 123. That's it. And once we have the user, scroll down and click on this add my IP address and click on the finish button. Now this is going to create a new cluster, and now you can connect with this cluster using this connect button. Click on it and now you have your connection link. Click on this connect to your application. Here you have this connection link. Just copy it back to your application and inside your project, create a new file with the name config.env.js. I'm using here a JavaScript file to store all my environment variables. So here I'm going to say export default and then I'm going to return an object. And inside this object, I'm simply going to say Atlas URL. And then I'm going to specify that link here, something like this. And what you have to do is you have to get rid of this square bracket password. And instead of this, you have to specify your admin password, which is admin123. So this is my username, admin, and this is the password. Just for that, once you have your Atlas connection, save this file. And then I'm going to open the git ignore file and ignore this file. So right down here, I'm going to say config.env.js. I'm not going to include this file in the finished project. So you have to create this file manually and specify your Atlas URL. Save this file and back to the connection file. Here I'm going to say import env from, then I'm going to specify // specify config.env, and right inside this function, here I'm going to say constant db is equal to await, and then I'm going to call mongoose.connect. And to this connect, you need to specify the URL. So as you know, we have the URL inside the config file right here. So we specify here env.atlas URL. Just after that, once we have the connection, we can then console.log here in the backtick operator, MongoDB successfully connected. That's it. And then if you want, you can concatenate your URL as well. So you can specify here env.atlas. That's upon you. Just after that, I'm also going to say if we already have a connection, then we are not going to display and reconnect this application with the MongoDB. So here I'm going to say if mongoose connection dot ready state. If this ready state is equal to 1, the 1 represent the valid connection. So if it is equal to 1, then I'm just going to return, means exit from this function. That's it. If you want, you can just console.log here a message as well, like database connected. Now your database is now successfully created. Just back to your API, inside these pages, you have your hello.js file, and at the top, right up here, you can say import connect, and inside this, here I'm going to say connect dot catch, and inside this catch, here I'm going to just print the error. So I'm going to say here response dot status 400 dot json, and this is going to be error, and inside this error here I'm going to simply print database connection error. That's it. Save the changes, back to your Thunder client right here, and make a get request again. If you make a get request, you're going to get the same response, but if you open your terminal, you're going to get this message, database connected. So now, once you have a successful connection to the MongoDB, you can store your data inside it. So let me just close this connection and this connection file as well. I'm also going to close this hello.js as well. We are not using this endpoint anymore. We are creating our own endpoints for this application. So to create endpoints, we can create a folder inside this API folder. So here, if I create a room folder, then that is going to become the endpoint. And to access this endpoint, you need to first specify the default file of this endpoint. So if you create here index.js, and inside this index.js, you copy and paste this code just like this, close this file, save the changes, back to the Thunder client, open the get request, and this time instead of API hello, we make a request to this room endpoint. We make a request to this folder, means to this room endpoint. If I make a get request, oops, I think I misspelled something. Yeah, I need to just get rid of this connection file. Save the changes. And if I make a get request to this room, then I'm going to have the result what I want. So now this is a valid request, right? Now just out of that, inside this index.js of this room file right here, I'm going to make and add a different request. So what I'm going to do is, let me add the connection again. Now because we have this index file inside this room, we need to add here / here, something like this. So now we can access the connection inside this file as well. Now inside this function, instead of just this response, now inside this file, we can simply say switch, and I'm going to say request dot method. And here I'm going to say if the request dot method, in case if it is a get request, then execute this first case. In the first case, I'm simply going to say response dot JSON with get request text. That's it. And then I'm going to break this statement. In the second case, if request is a type of post request, then I'm going to copy and paste this statement right here and say post request. And just out of that, make sure you add the default request as well. So we call here default, and inside this, we're simply going to say response.status 400, and then I'm going to say JSON error method not allowed. This is a simple function we are going to create inside this file. That's it. Let me just save the changes, back to the Thunder client, and now let me just open the get request. So now if I make a get request to this room, then I'm going to get this response, get request. And if I make a post request to this room, I'm going to get this post request response. So we have this response from this JSON. Now instead of just this response, we can create a controller for both these requests. Once we understand how to create the endpoint inside the Next.js application, let's take a look at how we can create a controller for this HTTP request. Instead of creating a function inside the switch case, I'm going to create a new folder inside a project. I'm going to create a new folder with the name controller, and inside this controller, we're going to have a file with the name room.controller.js. Now that's upon you. You can specify any name to this file. Now inside this file, I'm going to create different controllers for this application. So let me first create a simple get all rooms controller. So here I'm going to say export async function. The function name is get all rooms with request and response parameter. Make sure you add request and response parameter to this function. And here you add try and catch block. Inside a catch here, I'm simply going to say return response.status. Status is going to be 400. And then I'm going to say JSON in the object. I'm going to call that error. That's it. Inside a try block, here I'm going to say return. Let me just copy this response, cut the statement right from here and specify that right here. Save this file, copy this get all rooms, back to the index, and at the top, right up here, I'm going to say import. In the object, we need to call this get all rooms. Now, because this is not a default export from this file, we need to add this inside an object. And then I'm going to say from, and then specify the file name, double dot forward slash, specify double dot forward slash, and do it again. Here we have the controller folder, and inside that we have the room controller file. Just for that, let me copy this get all rooms and specify that right here. And don't forget to add here a parenthesis and pass request and response parameter, this one. And then here I'm going to call away. We need to add here a sync. We have a controller inside this file. Now we can do the same thing for the post request as well. We'll do that after a few seconds. Just for now, let's save the changes and create another endpoint inside this API. Now, as you know, room is going to be the first endpoint for this application. Let's create one more. If I create one more folder inside this API with the name chat, and inside this, I'm going to add a file with a dynamic parameter. So inside a square bracket, I'm going to specify room id.js. Notice how I create this file. Inside this chat folder right here, I'm going to create a dynamic variable. You can also call this file as a dynamic route. And inside this dynamic route, here we create a variable room ID. So if you want to access this route endpoint, you need to specify the room ID inside the URL. If you have that URL variable, then you can easily access this file endpoint. Let me show you how you can work with it. So instead of creating a new function inside this room ID, let me copy this function right from the index.js file. Copy it. And inside this room id.js, I'm going to paste this function as it is. Just for that, let me just copy this response, specify that here. And this is the type of get request. I'm going to leave everything as it is. And if you want, you can specify here response.set header. And here you can say allow. In the single code, you can say get and post. We only allow get and post request from this endpoint. And at the end, don't forget to add a break. So let's do the same for the index file as well. Copy this and do the same right here as well. Just like this. Save this file as well. And let me just test this endpoint. Back to the Thunder client. Here, let me just make a get request to the chat endpoint. If I make a get request to this chat endpoint, then we're going to get an error message. The reason behind this is we have this dynamic route inside this chat endpoint. Now to access this dynamic endpoint, we need to specify value to this variable. So if you specify here /1, when I click on this send button, you can see you can easily access this endpoint. This is the get request. If you make a post request, then you will get the post request response. You can easily access this variable inside your controller. I will show you that after a few seconds. Inside this index.js, let's create both these controllers. Let me first create this get all rooms and then create this post controller inside this room controller.js file. So instead of just this response, we're going to get the data from the backend and return that response from this get all rooms. So for that, we need to create a model. And from that model, we can get all the data from the MongoDB database and return that from this function. Model is nothing but a simple structure of your document. Using that model, you can access your MongoDB document. So inside this application, we're going to create two models. First is room and second is messages. Inside a room, we're going to have a name and messages. And inside of messages, we have a question, the user question, and then we have the response from the OpenAI API. And we're going to make a relationship between both these models. One room can have multiple messages. So this is going to be the one-to-many relationship. So let's create both these models inside a MongoDB database. So inside our application here, I'm going to create a new folder inside this project. And the folder name is models. Or you can specify folder name model. That's upon you. And inside this folder, here, we're going to create two models. First is room.model.js And the second is message.model.js. Inside a room, right here, I'm simply going to first import inside an object schema from the Mongoose. And let's create a schema inside this model. Using schema, we're going to specify structure to the MongoDB document. As you know, inside MongoDB, we don't have table with rows and columns. Instead, we have a collection and documents. So to create a document, we use schema. So to create a schema, we say constant room schema is equal to, and create a new schema object. And this object is going to create a new structure of the document. So here I'm going to say name. The type is going to be string. After that, I'm going to say messages. And this is a type of array. And inside this array, we have an object. And inside this object, I'm going to specify type schema dot types dot object ID. We're going to store different IDs of the messages inside this room. And then this is going to refer to the message model. So we call here message. That's it. MongoDB will automatically create the ID field. You don't have to worry about it. What we are going to do is, inside this room schema, inside a room, we're going to store the ID of the messages. When the user click on the room, we can access a different messages. Just for that, right down here, you have to say export default, and then you have to create a model or return the existing model. So for that, you have to import here model and models. So right down here, you have to say models dot room. If you have an existing model, then return it, or create a new one with model function. Inside this, here you specify room, and then specify structure of your room, which is room schema, this one. So if you already have a model, then use that. If you don't have this room model, then create a new one with this structure. Let me do the same for the message as well. Let me copy all this code, save this file, back to the message model.js, and paste all this code again. But this time, instead of this room schema, here I'm going to say message schema is equal to new schema, and then I'm going to get rid of this structure. And here I'm going to say question string, then specify answer string, and then we create here room field. And this is going to be the object. Inside a single room, you have multiple messages, and specify here type schema dot types dot object ID. And then we also going to add a reference. This is from the room collection. Don't forget to change this to message, and this became message. That's it. And don't forget to copy the structure and specify that right here. That's it. Your room and the model structure is now successfully ready. Let me close this file. Just back to the room controller.js, and at the top, now you can access your model. You can simply say here import room from // then specify your models, and inside that you have room model.js file. And right from here, you can say constant rooms is equal to await room dot find. You call a find method of this room model, and this find method is going to return the data of the MongoDB database. Inside it, we're just going to specify an empty curly braces. This means that return all the data of the room model inside this rooms variable. And now once we have this data, we can return that right from this response. Here I can say response.status 200.json, and from the JSON we return success property, which is going to be true, and then return data rooms. That's it. Let me save the changes and let me test this endpoint. Now, if you call this get rooms inside your API, so if you make a request to the room, and if it is a get request, when you click on send button, you can see you're going to get the response. We have a success message with this data. Now, because we don't have any data inside a MongoDB database, we get the empty array as a response. So if you back to your Mongoose, click on browse and click on connection, then you will see here, you have here a rooms collection. And right now you don't have anything inside this collection. So this controller is a get request controller. And here we can specify this endpoint. Just copy it and then specify that right here. So if you make a get request, you will get this controller. Let me copy this, specify that here. And now we're going to make a post request. So let's copy this export statement, specify that here. And this is a create room controller with request and response parameter. And using this controller, we're going to add data inside a room model. So what we're going to do is here I'm going to say try and catch block. Inside this catch, I'm going to simply return the error message. So let me just copy and paste the error message here like this. And here I'm going to say constant default room. I'm going to create the default room variable with the object. And inside this, I'm going to specify name to the room. So right now I'm going to specify the hard-coded value room. And then I'm going to specify messages. If you back to the room.model.js file, you can see we have this field message. Just use that right here. And I'm going to specify empty array here. So when you create a new room, this is going to create your room with the name room and then specify message field to empty array. So let's suppose that we have room 1 inside the MongoDB database, and if we create a new room, then we need to specify here room 2. So I want to increase the value of this number whenever I create a new room. So for that, at the top, right up here, I'm simply going to say constant length is equal to, I'm going to call await, and inside this parenthesis, I'm going to call await again. And here I say room dot find, and I'm going to find all the rooms and then get the length of it. So just out of this parenthesis, here I'm going to call dot length, just like this. And if we have a length of the rooms inside this variable, I can then specify that right here. So get rid of this, use template string, and here I'm going to say room space in the dollar in the curly braces. Here I'm going to say len plus 1. So whenever I create a new room, I'm going to have a new value to that room. Scroll down. So I'm going to say constant chat is equal to await room dot create. Now this create method is going to create a new room and store this data inside a MongoDB database. So I'm going to specify here default room, just like this. And then I'm going to return a response. So let me just copy this response right from here and then specify that right here, just like this. And just copy this chat and specify that here. So this is going to create a new room for this application. Let me copy this create room, save this file, back to the index.js, and instead of this response.json post request, so I'm going to just import here create rooms and then specify that right here. So let me first add await create rooms with request and response parameter. That's it. If you make a post request to this room endpoint, then this is going to create a new room inside a MongoDB database. Let me show you. Save this file as well, back to the room endpoint, and now make a post request. Now because we already have a data inside this controller, we don't need to pass any data with this post request. Instead, we just need to make a request. If I click on the send button, you can see now I'm going to get the response back from the MongoDB database. Here we have a message success true, and then we have the ID of this room. So now if you make a get request to the same endpoint to this room, we're going to have this data. You can see. Now this data is now successfully stored inside a MongoDB database. Now let me show you how you can delete this room with a dynamic parameter. Once you understand how you can access all your rooms using this endpoint, let's take a look at how you can access a single room. So let's suppose if I make a post request again, then this is going to create a new room with the room 2. So if I make a post request to the same endpoint, then you're going to have a room 2 with a new ID. And if you make a get request again, then this is going to return 2 rooms as a response. You can notice here. Now what I want to get a single room from this endpoint. I want to create a dynamic route so I can get a single room from this response. So for that, I'm going to create a new endpoint inside this API. So inside this room, inside this folder here, I'm going to create a dynamic file. I'm simply going to add here a square bracket and say here id.js. Now just for that, this route is only going to execute when you have id inside this URL. So inside this id, let me first add this function. So let me copy this and specify this function inside this id, something like this as it is. And just for that, instead of get all rooms, I want just a one room from this get request. So what I can do is I can create a new controller for that. So let me just get rid of both this controller back to my room controller.js, and just after this post controller right down here, I'm going to make a get request, the HTTP get request with the room ID. So here I need to say export async function, and the function name is get room, and this function is useful to get a single room. So I'm going to pass here a request and response parameter and call the try and catch block. Inside this catch, as you know, we're simply going to copy and paste error response. Here we say constant in the object we call id is equal to request.query. Now from the request.query, we're going to extract the id variable value. So now when you call this URL with a value something like this, then this is a variable. And now we can extract this variable from the URL using this technique. Response.json, save the changes, copy this get room, back to the id.js, and here I'm going to call that get room function. And instead of get all rooms, here we pass get rooms. Just for that, let me save these changes and back to the rooms endpoint. Now, if I make a get request, then I'm going to get one as a response. This is the parameter variable, right? Now, once I have get as a response, now I can access this variable and find a single room from this object. So what I can do is, instead of this response.json, here I can say constant room is equal to await room dot find by id, and then we're going to find the room with its id. So I'm going to pass that id here. I'm going to say if we don't have room, then return response.status 400.json, and inside the json we return the error message that no room found. And just for that, if we don't have this id, so if we don't have id, then return response.status 400.json, and inside this object I'm going to say error no chat id present. And just for that, once we have a single room, we can easily return that right down here. We can say return response.status 200.json, and inside of json we return success true and then return data, something like this. Now let me just save the changes back to the endpoint. Now let me first make a get request. So let me first get all my rooms and let me access my second room. So I need to get the id of the second room and then specify here / and then specify that id. So now if I make a get request to this endpoint, I'm going to get a single room as a response from this endpoint. Now I can do the same thing to delete this room as well. Now what I want to use the same thing to delete this room. So when I make a delete request to this endpoint, I want to delete this room. So to do that, I'm going to back to the room controller.js. Let me copy this, specify that here. And this is not a get request now. This is a delete request. Now here I'm going to say export async function delete room with request and response parameter. Just saw that here I'm going to call try and catch block with the error object, and inside this here I'm going to say return response dot status 400 dot json, and then I'm going to say error and return that error. Just out of that, here I'm going to say constant get the id from the request dot query, and if we don't have the id, then return this if statement, this one, just like this. And if we have the id, then say await room dot find by id and delete, and I'm going to pass my id right here. So this statement is going to delete the record from the MongoDB database. And then I'm going to say return response dot status 200. JSON is going to be success true, and then say deleted id. So we're going to return the deleted id as a response from this delete room function. Let me just save this file back to the id, and here as you can notice, I need to import delete room controller. Copy this, and don't forget to change this post to delete. Then get rid of this function and specify here delete with request and response parameter. And then I'm going to change this post to delete. That's it. Let me just create one more room. If I make a post request to this room, then this is going to create a new room. You can notice if I make a get request again to the same endpoint, then you will notice we have 3 rooms here. Now let me just get this third room as a response. Copy this id, specify here /, specify that id here, and make a get request. This is going to return that third room as a response. Now if I want to delete this room, then I will make a delete request. I'm going to select delete, and when I make a request, you will notice this is going to return a response success true, and we have the deleted room. So if I make a get request again to these all rooms, then I'm just going to have 2 rooms as a response. You can notice now the third room is now successfully deleted. Now just out of that, let me do the same thing for this chat messages as well. So let's see how you can access all the messages of the current room using this room id file. Now once you understand how you can get the individual room from this room controller.js file using this id.js, let me show you how you can access the individual messages. So if you open your response, then you'll notice here we have here a messages array. Let me show you how you can create a messages. I'm going to use this room id.js file to read and create a messages and push that messages to the individual room. I'm going to back to the room id.js. Here you'll notice I just have the response, get request, and post request. Instead of this response, let me just open controller folder, and here I'm going to create a new file with the name messages.controller.js, and inside this file I'm going to create a controller for the messages. So let me first copy this comment right from here and then specify that here we're going to make this request to the API chat endpoint with the variable room id. So whenever you make a request to this chat endpoint, you need to pass the room id as a parameter. Inside this, here you're simply going to specify export async function, and the function name is get chat. Don't forget to specify request and response parameter, and here you call try and catch block. Inside this catch, you simply return response.status 400.json, and you simply going to return the error message. That's it. Inside this try, here you first going to get the room id from the request.query right from this URL. So to get that, here you say room id is equal to request dot query. Make sure the name of this variable is exactly same with this file. So let's suppose that you have a file name id.js, then you have to specify the same name to this variable. Otherwise, you will get an error message. Using the file name, we define the variable name, and we are going to extract that variable name using this statement. To make sure the name of the variable is exactly same. Now, just for that, here I'm going to say if you don't have the room ID. Let's suppose you don't have the room ID, then we simply going to return a response dot status, which is 400 dot JSON. And inside the JSON, we return error message, which is no room ID present. Just for that, here I'm going to say constant messages is equal to await and then call message model. As you know, if you're back to the model right here, you can notice we have this message model here. We're using this message model to access a message, right? So let me just back to the message controller, and at the top here I'm going to say import message from single quote double dot forward slash, then specify the models. Here we have message model. Let me just copy this model and specify that right here. And then I'm going to find for the messages. So we need to first say here find, and if you try to make a request with just a find, then this is going to return all your messages. But what I want to get only the messages that belongs to this room ID. So inside this parenthesis, here we pass an object and say room, and then specify here room ID, this variable. As you know, inside this model, we have this room parameter. We match this ID of this room with this parameter. I'm going to say if we don't have messages, if we don't have message, then return response dot status 200 dot JSON, and I'm going to return error message if we don't have message here. So I'm going to say error no message found, just like this. And just out that, write down here if we have messages, then return it with response dot status 200. Oops, I think I misspelled here. It's not 200, it's 400 response, because this is an error response. So we need to specify status 400. And then here I'm going to say response dot status 200 dot JSON. And here we pass success, and data is going to be messages. That's it. Save the changes, copy this get chart, back to room id.js, and here you need to import that get chart from the message controller. So get rid of this room controller. Here you have to specify message controller, something like this. Copy this get chart and then specify that right here with request and response parameter. Don't forget to call await. Save the changes, back to the API endpoint, and now we're going to make a request to the chart endpoint with the ID. So here we need to specify the room ID. So if I copy the second room ID and pass that here, and if I make a get request to this endpoint, then this is going to return a response something like this. Now, because we don't have any messages inside the second room, that is why we get the empty array as a response. Now, let me show you how you can create a message using create chat controller. So let me copy this, paste that here, and this is a type of now post request to the same endpoint. Here I'm going to say export async function. The function name is create chat with request and response parameter, something like this. We need to first get the room ID. So I'm going to say constant. In the object, we get the room ID from request dot query. Once we have the room ID, we need to get the user question and answer. So if we get the user question and answer, then we can store that inside a message array. So here we say constant question and answer, and we get that from request.body. So from this request, we get an object with two values, question and answer. So when you make a post request to this endpoint, you need to pass both these values. So here I'm going to say if we don't have room ID, then simply going to return no room ID found. This one. I'm going to copy this if statement and then specify that here. Just for that, I'm going to say if we don't have question and if we don't have answers. If we don't have both these variables, then return a response.status 400.json. And with the JSON, we return error message. In the double quote, we're simply going to say cannot get data from the user. Just for that, here I'm going to say constant rooms is equal to await room dot find one. Now because room is not there in this file, we need to import the room right inside this file. So we need to say here import room from double dot forward slash, then specify the model, and inside that we have room model. So we get the room model and then specify that here. Here I'm going to say room dot find one and find for the room with the current ID, this one. So once we have the ID of the room, I can find that room and return that room to this rooms variable. So here I'm going to say in the object, I'm going to specify underscore ID room ID. So now this statement is going to return the current room to this rooms variable. So we can store all the messages of the user in that current room. Just for that, let me add here a command and say get current room, and then right down here I'm going to say if we don't have rooms, then return response.status 400.json with error object, and then I'm going to name this error no room found. Just after that, let's specify data to the message model. So to do that, we're simply going to say constant message is equal to new message. So we call a new object of this model, this one. Just for that, inside this parenthesis, I'm going to pass an object, and here I'm going to pass data to this model, this one. So I'm going to first pass the question, answer, and the room ID. So let me first pass the question. So here I'm going to say question, and the question is, so just for now, I'm going to specify the hard-coded value. What is ChatGPT? Let me add an answer. As you know, we have the answer field here. So let me pass here an answer field like this. And the answer is going to be ChatGPT is a chatbot. That's it. Just after that, we also have here a field called room. The message is belongs to this room. So we pass here room, and then we need to pass here the ID of the room. As you notice here, the type of this data is the schema type dot object ID. So inside this variable, inside this room ID, as you know, we are going to pass the room ID. So we pass here that room ID, just like this. So once we have this data, now I can save this data in the MongoDB database. So right down here, I'm going to add a comment and say save data in the database. So I'm simply going to say await message, this variable dot save. Now this statement is going to save this data in the MongoDB database. Just for that, once you have this data in the MongoDB database, you need to push the ID of this message inside the room. So if you back to the room model, then you will notice here we have the message field. So what we are going to do is right here, we are going to get the current room. So you can notice here, we first get the current room, and inside that current room, I'm going to push the ID of the message once we successfully save the data inside a MongoDB database. So you notice here, using this statement, we successfully saved this data in the MongoDB database. So once we successfully save it, we get the ID from this data and then store that inside a room inside this array. We can store multiple IDs inside a single room, as you know. So let me just do that. Scroll down here. I'm going to say room dot. I'm going to access this variable room. Let me access the rooms dot messages. If you back to the room model.js, then you will notice here we have here messages field. I'm going to access this messages field just like this, and then I'm going to say here dot push. Now because this is a type of array of object, we are going to push a new data inside it using push method. So we say here push, and inside this push I'm going to say message this variable dot underscore id. So we push this id inside this current room, this one. Once we have this, we need to save this data as well. So we need to say here await rooms dot save. Here let me add a command and say save data, the room model. And at the top, let me add a comment here as well to push message in the room model. And at the end, right here, you have to say return response.status, which is 200. And the response is JSON in the object we call success true. And then call here data with message, this variable. The create chat controller is now successfully ready. Let me just copy this create chat, save this file back to the room ID, and at the top here, we need to first import this create chat from the message controller, and instead of this response, we call that DA chat with request and response parameter. Don't forget to call here await. And now let me test this create chat. So if I open this endpoint, as you know, this is the second room ID. Request to the room endpoint, then I'm going to get all my rooms as a response. So inside this second room, what I want to push my messages. So let me first copy this ID and add here chat endpoint with this ID. So this is going to return this room. If I make a get request on this endpoint, you will see, oops, I think I misspelled something. Yeah, let me back to the message controller and inside a chat here. I think I misspelled here. I just added here a colon. Instead, here we have a comma. Let me save the changes, close this file. Now, if I make a request again, I'm going to get true as a response. Now, because we don't have any messages inside the second room, we get empty array. Let me add a message inside this second array. If I make a post request to this chat endpoint with this ID, then I'm going to push a data inside the second room. But what I want to pass data with this request. So right inside this body here, select the JSON, and inside an object, we need to first pass the question. Now, because this is a type of JSON data, we need to wrap this inside a curly braces, something like this. And now, if you back to your message controller, then you will notice here, I just pass here the hard-coded values. Let me cut this hard-coded value right from here and specify that right here. And let me do the same for the answer as well. Let me copy and cut this and pass that right here. Pass your answer, pass comma, and here I'm going to pass the answer. And now right here, you have to pass this question like this and this answer, something like this. Or you can just get rid of this filled value, just like this. Both statements are identical. Save the changes. If I click on this send button and make a post request to this second ID, if I click on send, you can see now I'm going to get a data as a response. Right inside this data here, we have a question, what is ChatGPT, then we have an answer, then we have the room ID, then we have the ID of this data. So now if you make a get request to the same endpoint, now you will get a response back from this room ID. Now because we have a data inside my second room, you will get the response back from this second room ID. Now if you make a request to the room then you will notice inside the second room, now you have the ID. You have one message inside your second room. You will notice here. I select this second room ID and pass that right here and make a GET request. You will get a second room as a response. So inside the second room, you have one message. And inside that message, you will notice this is the ID of your message. So if you make a request to the chat with this ID, then you will get this response, right? What I want to remove these parameters right from this request because we are not using these parameters. So if I back to the message controller, if I scroll up, then you will notice here to this get chat, using this find, we return all the data to these messages. If as a second argument, if I pass an object with double underscore v 0 and room 0, if I pass this, save the changes, then you will notice we won't get both these fields as a response from this endpoint. So if I make a request again, you can see we just have the ID, question, and answer. Now, if you want, you can get rid of this ID field as well from this chat endpoint. Now, just for that, let me show you how you can populate this message ID. So if you make a request to the rooms, you will get all your rooms. If you copy the ID of the second room, pass that here, and make a request, you will get this response. And inside the messages, you're just going to have the ID of the message. Let me show you how you can populate this. If you back to the rooms controller.js, if you open the get rooms, this controller, then you will notice here, this statement is going to return the current room. Now, if you pass here dot populate and specify your populate model. So as you know, we have a messages model. If I add messages, make sure you specify s at the end of the model, back to the endpoint. And if I make a request again, you can see we have the populated messages. We get the response what I want from this endpoint. Now, if you want, you can create here a delete chat endpoint as well. You have to create a delete controller inside the message controller.js. And because we are not using this controller, that is why I'm going to put this inside the exercise section. And now just for that, once we have all the endpoints, what we wanted from this API, let me show you can connect this API to the OpenAPI ChatGPT model. To create a new message, we pass this hard-coded data. Now this is worthless to pass this hard-coded data and store that inside a MongoDB database when we have the OpenAI API. Using the OpenAI API, we are going to create the ChatGPT app. ChatGPT is an AI-powered chatbot created by OpenAI. If I search for OpenAI, then you will find here we have this openai.com website. Just click on it and then click on developers and documentation. Here you can find all the information of the OpenAI API. The ChatGPT is the largest language model from OpenAI that was designed and trained to interact with the people via a chat user interface. So if you scroll down, here you can see you have the guideline to use this API in your application. If you click on Quick Start, then you will find all the details of this API. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this API reference, and right from here you can find more about this API. You have to just install this OpenAI and then get the API keys. You have to just log in and get your API keys. So I'm going to open my terminal, stop the development server. And here I'm going to say npm install OpenAI. Now this is going to install this OpenAI library in my project. Let me start the development server again. And just out of that, you need to have an API key to access this API. So just click on these API keys. You have to log in the OpenAI. So just click on login. And once you log in, you're going to have the API keys. From here, you can access your secret API keys. To create a new API key, click on create new secret key, copy it, and just press OK. So I'm going to just back to my application, open the config file. So let me just scroll down. Here, I'm going to open the config.env.js file. And here, I'm going to create OpenAI API key. I'm going to create here a property. So now you can access this property. What you have to do is you have to import the configuration and this OpenAI API module and then configure your application. So you have to specify the organization and your API key. For that, once you have this OpenAI variable, this is going to allow you to access the models. And then you have different models, so you can make a request to that models and get a response back from it. So if you open these models, then you will find different models right inside this API. We are not going to dive deep inside this API. Instead, we're just going to back to the application, and then I'm going to close this config file. Then I'm going to open the controller, and here we have the message controller.js file. And right inside this create chat, here I'm going to configure OpenAI API. So scroll down, and here I'm going to add a comment, config OpenAI API, just like this. And here I'm going to say constant config is equal to new configuration. So now you have to just import the configuration right from the OpenAI. So say here import from OpenAI. And what you have to import is you have to import configuration and OpenAI API. Now just for that, copy this. Here you have to specify this configuration, something like this. And then inside this configuration, you have to specify your API key. So just specify here an object and say API key. As you know, you have your API key inside the config file. So just say import env from // specify config.env file, and inside this env you have the API key. You just pass env.open_API key, just like this. So now once you configure your application, use this config variable and create the OpenAI variable. So write down here, say constant OpenAI is equal to new OpenAI API. This one, I'm going to access this function and then specify here this configuration, this one. Now, once you configure this, now you can access this API with a different API model. So right down here, you have to say constant completion is equal to await. And from this await, you can access OpenAI dot create completion. And inside this, you can specify your properties. So inside an object, you specify different parameters to this OpenAI create completion function. The OpenAI API uses several parameters to customize requests and control the output of response. So first parameter is model. The model specifies the name of the OpenAI language model to use, such as DaVinci or Curia. So right now, we are using a model called DaVinci. So if you open the API reference, then you will notice here, you have this model, DaVinci, this one, and then specify that right here. This model is used to return one or more predicted completions. Just for that, you also need to specify prompts here. So you pass here prompt, and right here inside this prompt, you have to specify your question. As you know, you have your question inside this variable. Copy it and specify that right here. Now the prompt provide a text prompt to generate the completion or the response prompt. Just for that, you have a temperature. So you call here temperature. Temperature controls the randomness of the generated text. A higher value will result in a more random response. So the values you specify here is 0 or 1. Let me specify 0.5. Just after that, you have the max token. You can specify here max token. The max token set the maximum number of tokens. So the words, or you can say the symbols, to generate the text. I'm going to specify here 100. And just after that, you can also call top p parameter. Now this parameter controls the diversity of generated text by setting a probability threshold for selecting the most likely next token. And this is going to be 1. This is going to return a response, and we get that response inside this completion variable. So when you have your response back from this OpenAI, you can specify that response to this answer. So instead of this answer, now we can specify here a colon and say completion dot data dot choices, and we select the first choice from the response. So we pass here an array of 0 and we get the text from it. So we call here text. So when this API return a response, we get that response inside this completion, and from that completion we access the data choices. You might get multiple choices from this OpenAI. So I'm just going to choose the first choice and then get the text of it and specify that to this answer. When you make a request, you don't need to specify this answer when you make a post request. I'm back to my endpoint, and if I make a request to this chat endpoint with the room ID, so let's suppose if I select the second room, copy this ID and pass that ID right up here, and this is a type of post request, then I'm going to select the body and pass the JSON data. Inside this JSON data, we just need to pass the question, the prompt, and this is my question. Now if I make a post request, then this is going to take some time and return a response. You can notice we have this response back from the OpenAI. I'm going to ask a question, what is ChatGPT? And then the OpenAI return the answer. So now once we successfully created the backend, let's access this data in the front end and finish this project. Now, once we understand how to create the backend for this ChatGPT 2.0, let's take a look at how we can access this backend. So I'm going to just first close all my files. Let me first save all the files, minimize the project. And now, once we successfully finish the backend, let's create a new folder inside this project. Let's create a new folder with the name library. So I'm just going to specify name lib. And here, I'm going to add a file called request.js. Now using this file, we're going to make a request to the backend. We call a fetch method to fetch all the data from the backend inside a frontend. So here, I'm going to first import the base URL of the backend. As you know, if you back to the Thunder client, here we have this base URL of all the requests. So let's copy it and back to the config.env.js right here, pass here a comma and say base URL. And in the double quote, I'm going to pass this base URL variable. So now once we have this base URL here, let me just close this file, and at the top, I'm going to say import env from double dot specify config.env file. Just for that, here you have to say export async function. The function name is get all rooms. Now this function is going to return all the rooms, and here I'm going to call await fetch. Now to this fetch, you need to specify the URL and a type of method. So what we're going to do is here we pass the URL. So we pass here backtick operator, call the base, then call the dollar curly braces, and then call the base URL. So as you know, inside the .env, we have this base URL. So we pass that here and then specify the forward slash. And as you know, to get all rooms, we need to specify here endpoint room. And this is a type of get request. Now we don't have to specify method here because fetch will automatically consider this request as a get request. Just for that, we need to convert this data into JSON. So we need to wrap this fetch inside a parenthesis like this and call await again. And then just after this parenthesis, you can call .json. So we basically convert this data into JSON and get that response back inside a variable. So we can simply now say constant in the object we call success and data. So we destructure the success and data variable from this endpoint. Just for that, here we say if we don't have success, if we don't have true inside this success, then throw a new error. And the error name is error fetching rooms. And then I'm just going to return the data. Now let's do the same thing for the messages as well. So just copy it, paste it down here, and this is for get messages, and this is for the chat endpoint. So we pass here chat, and make sure you pass the room ID as well. So we pass here forward slash, and to this get messages, we pass a parameter room ID, and we pass that room ID right here. So when we call this get messages, we need to pass the room ID as a parameter, and then this is going to make a request to this chat endpoint with this room ID and get the response back inside this variables. So for that, let me change these rooms to messages like this. Let me do the same. So let me just copy this function again, and this time we are using this function to create room. Now when we create a room, we don't need any argument, so just get rid of it. We're going to make a fetch request to the rooms endpoint. So we pass here room and get rid of this variable, just like this. And now keep in mind, this is a type of post request. So just after this room, here we pass a comma and pass an object. Inside this object, you need to specify the type of request. So we pass here method, and this is the type of post request. So we pass here post. Just for that, let me get rid of this and say here room and return a data. That's it. Just for that, let me copy this, scroll down. This function is for delete room. And now what we need to do is we need to first get the room ID and then pass that room ID as a params. So here we pass forward slash, pass dollar. In the curly braces, we pass this room ID. And this is not a type of post request. Instead, it is a type of delete request. So we pass here delete. And now I'm going to change this error to error deleting room. And at the end, I'm going to make a send message function. So I'm simply going to copy this one, this function, and paste that here. Scroll down. Then I'm going to change this function name to send message. And this time, instead of just the room ID, when we add a message, we need the room ID as well as the question. Inside an object, I'm going to get the room ID and the message or the question. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this variable. That's upon you. So sort of that, here, I'm going to say if we don't have room ID and if we don't have message, then throw a new error. And the error is invalid arguments. Just are that. Here I'm going to say constant success, and then I'm going to change this endpoint to chat. I'm going to leave this room ID as it is, but this is a type of post request. And then with this post request, you need to pass the data as well. So just after this method, right here, I'm going to pass a comma and say headers. And in the object, we pass the content type, which is a type of application JSON, the JSON data. And then just after this object, here, we pass the body. And in the body, as you know, you need to pass the question. So here I'm going to pass an object and say question message, this variable. So when we pass value to this message, we pass that message value to this question property. But this is not a valid statement because you need to just stringify this statement so we can pass that to this method. So grab this, pass here JSON dot stringify, and then you have to pass your body here, just like this. So now once you've done that, scroll down. Here I'm going to say error sending message. Save the changes. Just out of that, if you want, you can return the success as well with this response. Pass success and data. That's upon you. And now you can access all your backend data with these functions. So let me show you how you can access it using React Query. Now, once we have all these methods to access the backend data, let me install React Query inside this application. React Query is a library that helps us with the data fetching. So let's install the React Query inside this app. So let me just stop the development server. And here I'm going to say npm I for install and then install React Query. Now, so once I have this library, let me just start the development server again and close this file. And now what you have to do is you have to open your pages and app.js file. And right here, you have to first wrap your component inside the query client provider. The query client is the central hub that manages and caches data fetching and caching for the entire application. The query client is responsible for handling all the queries and mutation in your application and provide a unified interface to interact with them. So at the top, right up here, I'm going to say import in the object. I'm going to say from React query. And what we are going to import is, we are going to import the query client. Then we're going to import the query client provider and the hydrate component. So that right down here, you have to create a query client. So you have to say here constant query client is equal to new query client. Just out that right down here, you have to copy this query client provider, paste that here, something like this, and put your component inside this query client, something like this. You have to just make this query client as a wrapper to your component. Just out that here, I pass parentheses and put this component right inside this parentheses, something like this. Just out that, you need to access the property called client and pass this query client here, just like this. Oops, I think I misspelled something. Here, I need to add a query client. So now we create a new query client and pass that to this client property. Now this hydrate is a method that allows you to hydrate your client-side cache with the data that was previously fetched on the server. This can improve the performance of your application by reducing the amount of data that needs to be fetched on the client and can provide a better user experience by rendering content more quickly. So just down here, we pass the hydrate like this, and then to this hydrate, we're simply going to pass a state. Inside a state, we pass page props dot dehydrated state. Just after that, you have to grab your component and put that inside this hydrate. Just like save your file. Just check your server is running or not. Then close this app.js, and now you can use React query inside your application. So let's use the React query first inside the index.js file right here. So what we are going to do is, we're going to first import the React query here. So I'm going to say here import in the object. We first say from React query, and from the React query, I'm going to import use query, and just out of that, inside this home, I'm going to call use query, this function. You need to specify tag. So I'm going to specify here rooms. So whenever you want to update your rooms, you can access this token, or you can say this key. Now let's suppose that you insert a new value inside this room. In that case, you can use this key to update your UI with this key. I'll show that later after a few seconds. That's about you can specify any name to this key. Just out of this React query, here you have to first import in the object. You have to say from double dot forward slash, then specify the library folder, and here you have the request file. And right from this request file, you need to get all rooms. So just copy this get all rooms and then pass that as a second argument to this use query, something like this. You don't need to pass any parentheses or anything like that. The second argument is a type of function, and we are passing the fetch function as a second argument to this use query. Just so that this use query is going to return a data. You can get that data inside a variable. I'm going to say constant in the object. You can destructure all the data of the use query. Here you get is loading. You can see the use query is going to return different properties. I'm just going to access is loading, is error, and data and error. Just out of that, right down here, I'm going to say if is loading. If it is true, then return a division tag with is loading message. If is error is true, then return a division tag with the Tailwind class text center with the error message. So I'm going to say here error dot message. Just out of that, if we don't have data, then return div with the text center class and say no messages. Back to the project, and you can see you're going to have this loading message. Now, instead of this is loading, let me just create a component for that. So I'm going to back to the component right here and create a new file with the name loading.js. Here, I'm going to say export default function. Inside this function, I'm simply going to return a division tag with some class names. So I'm going to specify here class name, flex, justify center, item center, and padding top 52. Inside this div right here, we add another div with text center, and this div is for title, right? So inside this div here, we add h1 heading tag and say loading like this, and add some class names. So here I'm going to add text to Excel, text gray 20, and font bold. Just out of this h1 heading tag here, I'm going to add a paragraph and say class names width is going to be 3 by 4. Then add margin X, auto, padding by 5, and text gray 400. And inside this paragraph, I'm simply going to put message, please wait while we load your chat. So now this is a very simple loading UI. Save these changes, close this file, and at the top, you have to say here import loading from in the double dot / specify components, and here you have this loading component. Copy this and pass that right here, something like this. Back to the project and reload it. You can see you're going to have that loading component here. If I make this true, you can see you have this loading component to your application. Let me just undo here. And now once you have your data inside this data variable, let me show you your data. So if I say here console.log data, back to the project and open the console, reload the browser, you have your data back from the server. We just have 2 rooms inside the backend, so we get that data as a response. So now I can use this name and specify that right here inside the aside section. So let me just show you that how you can display all rooms inside this aside section. So let me get rid of this console. Scroll down. Here I'm going to say if we have data, only then display the aside section. And now, as you know, once we have the data, we can pass this data to the aside component. So here I'm going to say get rooms is equal to, and in the object I'm going to pass this data. Let me save this file, open the components, and inside that we have aside component. Open it, and in this parenthesis I'm going to destructure get rooms. Scroll down. So now if I console.log this get rooms, then you'll notice you have an array of object as a response. So now you can iterate over this array of object and display all your rooms. So to do that, you have to just scroll down, open this division tag. Let me just grab this division tag and put that inside a map function. So let me just grab this, and here I'm going to say curly braces get rooms dot map, and here I'm going to say chat and index, and from this I'm going to return this division tag as it is. Don't forget to pass here a key index, so you will not get any warning. And then to this room 1 here, you have to get this value from the backend. You have to say here chat dot name, and if we don't have any value here, we can pass here chat name here. That's it. Back to the project, and I can see now we have these rooms from the backend. Let me show you can create a new room using this aside section. As you know, inside this aside we have this new chat button. Using this, I want to create a new room. So to create a new room, I'm going to use this button, this one. So for that, what we need to do is we need to use mutation. So we need to say here import in the object from React query, and you have to say here use mutation. So right down here, I'm going to say constant create mutation. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this variable. Here we call use mutation. Then right here as a first argument, we need to pass here a function. So as you know, inside this library, we have this request, and inside this request, we have this create room function. We copy this, and inside this aside, right up here, I'm going to say import in the object. We pass create room from double dot forward slash specify library dot request, and then we pass this create room right here. Just after that, we pass here a comma and pass second argument. And here you can access the on success function. So whenever the data is successfully inserted, we're going to have the console.log message. But instead of just a console.log message, I want to update my data. So whenever there is a new data inserted in the backend, I want to instantly update the UI. So for that, we need to use the use query client variable. So at the top, right up here, using this React query, right here, you have to pass here a comma and say use query client. Then copy this use query client right here. You have to say constant query client is equal to use query client. Just for that, right down here, you have to say query client dot invalidate queries. And as I said, what I want to update my rooms. So if you back to the index, then you will notice here I pass here a key rooms to this get all rooms. I'm using the same key right here. So that will just update all my rooms. So this function is going to revalidate the queries and update all the data. Let me just use this create mutation and pass that to this button. This button, let me just add on click function. And inside this function, I'm going to say create mutation dot mutate. So now this button is going to create a new room inside my application. Let me show you. Save the changes, back to the app. And now when you click on this new chat, you can see this is going to create a new room inside your application. Now the UI will instantly update because of this statement. If you remove this statement, you won't see any update in the UI. Now just for that, when we have a new chat, we also need to add this working delete button. So for that, let's create one more mutation. So let me add here a command for create new room. Let me copy this, specify that here, and I'm going to say here delete room. And here I'm going to say constant delete mutation is equal to use mutation, and inside this I'm going to call this delete room function. So inside this aside right here at the top, let me first import the delete room, something like this. And inside this mutation, you need to pass the delete room function. Just out of this delete room here, I can pass a second argument. So pass here a comma and pass an object. And now I can access this on success here as well. So copy it and specify that right here. So let me just copy this delete mutation and specify that to this button. To this button, this one. This is my delete button, right? So right here, we pass on click. So when we click on this button, I'm going to call a function with delete mutation dot mutate. And inside this mutate, you need to specify a variable. So if you back to your request, then you will notice you have this room ID inside this delete room. So you need to pass this room ID with this mutate. So to get the room ID, you just need to access this chat dot underscore ID. That's it. Save the changes. And now if you click on this delete button, this is going to delete that room from the application. You can notice. What I want to display the messages inside this main section. So to do that, we need to back to the main section of this app right here. Now, let's understand how to make the main section of this application. When I click on this room 1, I want to display all the messages of the room 1. When we click on this room 2, I want to display all the messages of the room 2. So for that, we need to create the onClick event on these rooms. So instead of creating this onClick event inside this aside, we create the onClick event inside this index.js file. Because when we have the room ID inside this index.js, only then we can display the main section. Otherwise, we are not going to display anything. So inside this index.js, right here, I'm going to say function. The function name is on room click. And inside the params, we specify room ID. And just out that, at the top, right up here, we need to create a constant state. So we pass here room ID and set room ID is equal to, and then I'm going to specify here use state. The default value is now. Now because we don't have use state in this app, we need to first import it. So I'm going to say here import in the object use state from React. Just out of that, you need to pass this on room click to this aside component. So when you click on the room, I'm going to get the ID and display that ID right inside this console. So if I say here room ID, I'm going to display this room ID parameter here inside this on room click. So let me just pass this on room click right here. I'm going to pass handler is equal to on room click, just like this. Copy this handler back to the side, and at the top right up here, I need to just pass this handler here, and then you have to just scroll down. So when you scroll down, here is your room. So now you can create your on click event and pass this handler. So you simply have to pass here a function handler with chat dot underscore ID. So we are going to access this chat variable and pass ID to this handler. So once we pass this value to this handler, we can access this variable value inside this index.js file right here. If I click on room 2, I'm going to have the ID of the second room. When I click on the room 1, I'm going to have the ID of the room 1. So now once we have the ID of the room, I can use this data variable and get a single room. So instead of this console.log, now I can say data.filter. And inside this filter, I'm going to pass room. And right here, I'm going to say if room dot underscore ID, if it is equal to room ID. If it is true, then set the room ID. So I'm going to set this room ID to this use state, this one. And now I'm going to copy this room ID, this state variable, scroll down, and here I'm going to say if we have the room ID, only then display the main section. So I'm going to cut this main section and paste that here. And just out of that, you have to pass this room ID to this main section. So I'm going to say here room ID is equal to room ID. So once we have the room ID, you can get all your messages. Back to the components. Here we have main.js. Right here in this parenthesis, we pass an object and say room ID. I'm going to access this variable room ID right inside this main. Just out of that, we need to say here import in the object called use query from React query, and then we need to say here use query, and inside this use query you have to call the get messages. So say here import in the object, you call get messages from the library request.js. Just copy this get messages, pass that right here, and make sure you pass key to this use query. So as a first argument, as you know, you need to pass key. So I'm going to pass here a key messages. This get messages is going to get a parameter called room ID. So to pass that room ID to this get messages, you have to wrap this key inside an array. So grab it, pass this key just like this, and pass here a comma and pass your parameter room ID. And now you have to grab this get messages, call here a function call get messages, and pass your room ID here, something like this. Just out of that, I'm going to call some constant variable here, something like this. I'm going to call is loading, is error, then data is going to be the messages and the error. Just out of that, I'm going to call here if is loading it true, then call loading component. Let me import a loading component first. Loading from the loading component. Just out of that, is error is true, then return the error with the error message. I'm going to say here if the messages dot length, if it is equal to 0, then return not found. So just call here div not found. Just after that, once you have your data inside these messages, scroll down, and here you have to add here curly braces and say messages. If you have messages, then execute this second statement, messages dot map. And then here I'm going to call message and index. And this is going to return a function, something like this. And here inside this function, I'm simply going to return a division tag with key index. And then inside this div, I'm simply going to copy both these components and paste that here. And as you know, inside these messages, we're going to have all the messages of the room. So I can pass that messages to this components. So here to the ask, we pass question is equal to, in the curly braces, we pass message dot question. And to this response, here we pass answer is equal to message dot answer. Just out of that, let me save the changes, open the ask and response component and access both these values. So let me open the ask. Here I can access the questions and pass your queue, and then pass this queue right here back to the response, and here you have to add answer. So if you're back to this main, then you'll notice we have this ANS property. Just use that right here, get it out this ChatGPT hard-coded value and pass this ANS, this property here, back to the project and reload it. Right now, when I reload the project, I won't get anything here. This is because when I click on this room, only then I'm going to get my data. You can notice in the first room, I don't have anything. As you know, we don't have any messages inside the room 1. That is why I won't get anything inside this main section. So what I want, when I have messages, I want to display it. When I don't have messages, I want to display something here. So I'm going to back to the index.js, and right here, as you know, when I have room ID with the messages, then I'm going to display something, right? I'm going to display this not found inside this main section when I don't have any data inside this main. I'm going to create a new component for that and specify name to it, not found.js. And inside this component, I'm simply going to copy this loading function and paste that here. So inside this, here, I'm going to add a span tag and say here, oops, let me add some classes here, text MD and text gray 300. And to this h1 heading tag, here, I'm going to say chat not found. And just out of that, right here, I'm going to add a paragraph and say here, you don't have any chat yet. Click on this new chat button to create a new chat. Let me just save this, close this not found.js component, back to the main. And instead of this not found, now I'm going to grab this component at the top. Here I'm going to say import not found from not found component. Copy this and specify that right here, something like this. Save the changes and reload the browser. As you can see, I don't have anything here because I didn't selected any room. If I select the first room, I'm going to get this message. Oops, no chat found. If I select the second room, I'm going to have my chat here. Just out of that, I want to display something when I open this application. You can notice I don't have anything here because I didn't selected any room. For that, I need to specify something right inside this main section. So for that, let me create a banner section. So let's create a component called banner.js. Inside this banner, I'm going to copy the content from notfound.js and paste that inside this banner, something like this. This span tag here, I'm going to specify introducing, then I'm going to specify here ChatGPT 2.0. I'm going to specify that text here instead of no chat found. And right here inside this paragraph, I'm going to copy and paste some content. Save the changes, close this file, back to the index.js. And right here at the top, don't forget to import banner from // specify component. Here we have banner. Copy this banner component, scroll down, and instead of this statement, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if we have this room ID, only then display this main component, otherwise display the banner component. Just like this. Back to the application, and as you can see, we're going to have the response something like this. Let me change the font size of this ChatGPT text. So I'm going to back to the banner, and here I'm going to specify text 7XL. And as you can see, I'm going to have the result what I want. And now if I select the room, I'm going to have my data as a response. If you like this UI, then you can leave this as it is. If you want to change it, just back to the response, and to this icon here you have to add max height 16, and back to the component, you'll have the result something like this. Now what I want to search something inside this input text box and get the response back from the OpenAI API. So let's see how to do it. Now let's take a look at how you can search anything from this input text box and get the response back from the OpenAI API. So I'm going to back to my application, save all the files, and close these components. Just after that, if you open the index.js file, here you can notice we have this search component. Here I'm going to say if we have the room ID, only then display this search component. And to the search component, I'm going to pass this room ID, just like this. Save this file, back to the components, open the search.js, and right here, I'm going to first get the value from the input text box, right from here. To get that, at the top, you need to first say constant search, comma, set search is equal to use state, and the default value is empty string. At the top, you have to import use state from the React, and then you have to scroll down, and to this input text box, right down here, you need to say value is going to be search, this variable, and then whenever you type anything inside this input text box, you call the onChange event handler with the event parameter like this, and then say set search, you call this state, this one, you call this state function set search, and here you're simply going to pass e.target.value. That's it. When you search for anything, you're going to have that value inside this search variable. And when you click on the submit button, we're going to submit this data to the backend. So first, let me create here a function on the submit with the event parameter. Then we need to say here e.prevent default. We need to prevent the default execution of the form. And then here, I'm going to say console.log search. We need to call this on submit to this form. Right here, we call on submit function, this one. Back to the project, reload it, and now open the first room, and here I'm going to say how to click on this button. When I click on it, I'm going to have this response inside this console. So once I have this response, I can now pass this response to the backend and get the response back from the OpenAI API. So right here, instead of console.log, I'm going to say set search. So when I click on this on submit, I'm going to specify empty string to this search. So I'm going to just empty this text box whenever I click on this button. Now, just for that, at the top, we need to use client and use mutation. So here, I'm going to say import from React query. And I want to import here use mutation and use query client. Inside this constant variable, here you have to say constant query client is equal to use query client, just like this, and say here constant mutation is equal to use mutation. And inside this use mutation, you need to pass here send message function. So if you open this request.js, then you will notice here, you have here a function called send message, this one. Now this send message is going to create and send a message to the backend and get the response back from it. So you have to call this send message with these parameters. So inside this search right here at the top, you need to say import in the object you call send message from // specify library, and there we have request.js file. Copy this send message and pass that right here. But instead of just this message, as you know, we need to get the parameters as well. So I'm going to call here a function, something like this. And then I'm going to pass here return send message. And then I'm going to pass here arguments, just like this. And pass that arguments to this send message. Now, just for that, as a second argument, as you know, I can pass on success function. So here I'm going to pass on success function, something like this. So we pass query client dot invalidate queries, and as you know, the key name is messages. Just out of that, you have to call this mutation right inside this on submit. So just out of this e.prevent default, right here we call mutation dot mutate, and inside this we need to pass an object, and to this object we need to pass the room ID and the message. So as you know, if you scroll up, if you back to the index.js, then you will notice here you can access the room ID with this property. So just back to the search here you pass curly braces, pass the room ID, and pass that room ID here just like this, and then pass messages. So just copy these messages right from this parameter and pass that in the search, just like this. And as you know, you have your text inside this search variable. So we pass that search variable here. That's it. Just out of that, scroll down, and here I'm going to say if mutation dot is loading. If the mutation is loading, then return a division tag with the class name text center, text gray 50, and then say loading. And if mutation dot is error, then return a division tag with the same classes. So just copy it, pass that here, and in the division tag right here we pass error. In the object we pass mutation dot error dot message, just like this. Back to the application, close this, reload the browser, and close this console. If I click on this room 1, right now I don't have any messages inside this room, right? If I search here, what is the population of India, and if I click on this button, then this is going to display this loading message. And you can see we have here the answer. As of July 2020, the population of India is estimated to be 1.37 billion. And you can ask any question to this chatbot. Suppose if I ask here, who is the president of USA? If I press enter, then this is going to show us the loading message, and we have the answer here. The current president of the United States is Joe Biden. And if I search the same for India, who is the president of India, then I'm going to have the answer back from this chatbot. The current president of India is Ramnath Kovind. So you can ask any question to this chatbot and get the response back from it. If you open your second chat, you'll have your chat here. If you want to add your messages in the second room, you can do that as well. So let's suppose if I ask here population of China. When I press enter, you can see we have the answer, approximately 1.4 billion people. And if I back to my first room, I'm going to have all my messages as it is. Let's create one more room. If I click on this new chat, this is going to create a new room. Right now, if I click on it, I don't have any messages here. Let's create a new message. So here I'm going to search for who is the CEO of Google. If I search for it, you can see I'm going to have a message. So from this text box, you can search for anything. So you have all your chats inside your rooms. You can access any answer and data from this app. Now, let's suppose if you accidentally create a new room by clicking on this new chat button. And if you don't want this room to be here, you can click on this delete button and delete this room from this chat. So I hope you understand how to create this ChatGPT 2.0 application with Next.js. If you find anything useful, make sure to press the like button, share this video with your friends, subscribe for more latest videos. That is all for now. I will see you in the next one.